For experimental research design, we can categorize that into four. We have the pre-experimental design, the experimental design, the quasi-experimental design, and the ex post facto designs. The main important thing about experimental design is the application of stimulus or treatment. An experimental group is the group that receives the experimental procedure or the treatment or the stimulus, while the control group is the group separated from the rest of the experiment such that the independent variable being tested cannot influence the results. This isolates the independent variable's effect on the experiment and can help rule out the alternate explanations of the experimental results. So, those individuals who receive the treatment belongs to the experimental group, and those individuals who do not receive the treatment is the control group. So both of them goes on with their lives, and you're going to check on all the other variables. So we're going to control the variables. We're going to observe the variables present for both control group and experimental group except for the treatment. So the changes that the experimental group has is basically because of the stimulus and no other factors, because the control group also experiences that other factor. Now let's go to experimental research design. For our experimental research design, there are three possible cases. We have the one-shot case study. For the one-shot case study, we have the X, the treatment, the experiment, and then after performing the treatment, after applying the treatment, you observe. So as an example, we apply a new personnel policy. So after the application of personnel policy, we're going to do job satisfaction measurement. So does the job satisfaction increase or decrease or improve or becomes more violent upon the application of that personnel policy? Next is one group pre-test post-test design. So one group pre-test, two post-test design. So you observe it at the start, that would be your pre-test. You apply the treatment. So observe, apply the treatment, and then after applying the treatment, you observe again. So pre-test, treatment, post-test. A job satisfaction measurement is taken before and after the treatment. So we are now sure that the change of behavior or attitude or beliefs in the job satisfaction is basically due to the treatment, because you're going to compare the pre-test and the post-test, and that improvement or decrease in job satisfaction is brought about by the treatment in between. Next, in the pre-experimental research design is the intact group comparison at post-test. So what we do is we conduct our post-test, but we have two groups. These two groups, group 1 and group 2, has been subjected into different setup, and we observe it after. So group 1 receives a treatment, group 2 does not. Then the group satisfaction measurement is taken and observed. In these cases, group 1 and group 2 may represent two different business units. The study does not include any pre-testing, and therefore any difference between the two groups prior to the study are unknown. Now, the best experimental research design is the true experimental research design. So what does it mean? So for the experimental research design, you have two groups, the experimental group and the control group. The assignment of the groupings, whether you belong to experimental or the control group, is subject to random assignment. So you have your population. we're going to toss coin. Do you belong to group X or to group control? Or you can randomly select from your 50 respondents, you divide it into two. So you have 25 envelopes containing control, 25 envelopes containing experimental group. So you shuffle this and then distribute it to the 50 participants. And then they would identify whether they belong to the control group or the experimental group. If this is done properly, this is the best experimental research design. So you can have your post-test control group. So you do your observation at the end after randomly assigning your control and experimental group. You can also have your pre-test, post-test, wherein random assignment was made. You can also check on other variables. You can check on several factors. So say for example, variable 1 versus variable 1 for control and experimental. You can have the orange, which is variable 2 versus variable 2, and then variable 3 versus variable 3. Now, there are cases that we can't do that experimental research design. So what we're going to do is to perform quasi-experimental research design. So we can have the non-equivalent control group design. You can have your pre-test, post-test, but there's no random assignment between control and experimental group. Now for time series design, what we do now is we observe and then we apply the treatment and then we observe again. So we're going to take multiple observations, and after each treatment, we observe again. So pre-treatment observations establish control group baseline. Post-treatment observation establish a consistent change in the response. Next is comparing different variables. So we have ex post facto design. So statistical controls for comparing treatment and control, or the relationship between two variables. This is called ex facto because the researcher arrives after the treatment has been administered. So for this one, observe that there are two variables, observation 1 and observation 2, which is being correlated. And then for criterion group design, so we have two groups for which we're going to compare two different variables. Now let us consider ethical considerations and data gathering. So first, we're going to take into consideration the questionnaires, the observations, and the interviews. For questionnaires, all information gathered must be anonymous. Your questionnaire should not be included in the publication or in your documentation. So the process of data collection should be documented, but your questionnaires, the filled out questionnaire should not be included in your document. The questions should be carefully written to avoid bias and should not be opinionated or misleading. Participants have the right to not complete any particular items in the questionnaire and to withdraw at any point during the study. For observations, in overt observation, it needs to be considered that the presence of an observer may be threatening and may exert an influence and behavior. If you know that you are being observed, so it is possible that you are going to manipulate your response in order to look good. So that is for the overt observation. So in as much as possible, you avoid being determined or being known that you are being observed. While for covert observation, it is the violation of the principle of informed consent and hence should be used only to situations where there is no alternative methods. For interviews, we must follow confidentiality. So remember that the interview is a personal interaction and everything recorded needs to remain confidential to protect the participants. Think about who else will be reading and verifying the data and transcriptions. Do they need to sign a confidentiality agreement? Can what is being said, what is being recorded, be misinterpreted? Remember to make clear and detailed notes to avoid confusion.